What's up, miniature painters? I love painting skin on miniatures. So today I'm going to share with you my favorite fantasy flesh recipe. It's very simple. It uses just a couple of colors to produce a dynamic range of hues as it progresses from the deepest shadows to the brightest highlights. So let's get started as I demonstrate this recipe on Elkthorn from the Dragon Eclipse board game. Oh, and welcome to Treehane Miniatures. We'll start by addressing the potential elephant in the room, which is my universal skin recipe. If I have a universal skin recipe, why do I have a fantasy flesh recipe? Well, that particular blend of colors excels at a wide range of applications. It consists of German camo black brown, orange brown, and ice yellow. It's capable of producing skin pigmentation of any level of melanin, from the darkest flesh tones to the fairest complexions. And while this universal skin recipe excels with its versatility, it lacks dynamism. It isn't really capable of producing the type of standout skin tone that would be the focal point of a piece such as this. The universal skin recipe is the proverbial jack of all trades, master of none. I still love it, but if I'm looking for something with a little more pop, I need to come up with a different approach. Unlike my universal skin recipe, this fantasy flesh recipe is more of a specialized concoction. It consists primarily of just two paints, Monument Hobby's Dark Plum Pro Acryl and Elven Flesh by the Army Painter. I'm using a very old bottle of the original Army Painter Elven Flesh, which you can still find at some online retailers such as Miniature Market. This particular formulation works best for fair-skinned characters such as elves, female humans, and the like. Using it to paint darker skin tones just isn't going to happen. Whereas a universal skin recipe uses German camo black brown as the deepest shadow color for light skin, it also works as a mid-tone color for very dark skin pigmentation. This works with the universal skin recipe because all of the colors in that recipe can work as a mid-tone color by simply painting more of the skin area with that color. Trying to paint very dark flesh with this fantasy skin recipe would mean painting most of the exposed flesh with dark plum, which would produce some very purple looking skin. It just wouldn't look right. As usual, I'm going to begin with a model that has been prepared with black primer. From here I apply a base coat of dark plum over all of the skin. I'm also covering all of the foliage on Elkthorn that makes up his clothing. I'm always surprised at how bright this paint looks when going on the model, but rest assured, this paint looks much darker when dry, as we'll see at the beginning of the next step. Also, don't let the fact that I'm painting an anthropomorphic deer creature dissuade you from using this recipe on your more humanoid characters. This is more of a human or elven flesh recipe, but I just really wanted to paint this Elkthorn character. It's my first time painting a miniature of this quality and I'm loving it. It's resin, so there are no gaps, no seams, and no mold lines anywhere. I'm completely sold on resin now. And now we can see how much more subdued this dark plum looks when dry. For the next layer, I'm going to add a little elven flesh to the dark plum. This is a secondary shadow color that will be added everywhere but the deepest recesses. I'm even adding it to the downward facing areas such as the chest and abdominals. However, on these downward facing attributes, I'm just hitting the most raised portions of the muscle to build some definition here, because on the abs in particular, there won't be much in the way of highlights going forward. Even at this early stage, I'm already beginning to draw my brush strokes toward the light source. I want the light to be coming from the model's upper left, so each stroke will be drawn in that direction where possible. Each color that I add to the model will be applied in a couple of thin layers, covering a little less area with each layer. This will work to create some smooth transitions from the darkest shadows to the brightest highlights. For the next layer, I simply add a little more elven flesh to the dark plum. This is beginning to create a pleasing tanned flesh tone. What I really appreciate about this recipe is how the hues move from violet shades to browns and finally to some yellow skin tones. The yellow tint of the elven flesh mixes with the violets in the dark plum to perfectly move through these color transitions. I'm not entirely sure, but I believe that this is where the new Army Painter Fanatic line would fail. I fear it would take this dark plum paint into the bright pink range. I'm noticing so much more desaturation with the new Fanatic line of colors, like the Army Painter is adding more white to their paints. They do have much better opacity, but noticeably less saturation. Anyway, this layer is where all of the muscles begin to take shape. I begin each stroke in the shadow area and follow through all the way to the brightest part of the muscle. Each muscle will be highlighted up to the point where it meets the muscle above. This means that the brightest part of one muscle will be adjacent to the deepest shadow of the muscle above it. We're building the foundation for our future highlights with this, but the application of strokes still don't need to be too technical at this point. I'm using pure elven flesh now to move us further into the highlights. This is where I find the process to begin to be more enjoyable. I'm working with more precision here, but since I need to cover a much smaller amount of real estate, the painting moves along briskly. I'm still highlighting toward the light source and highlighting each muscle up to the point where it meets the muscle above, but now my application of paint is a little more technical. I'm applying the paint with short strokes that run perpendicular to the length of the muscle. As we reach the end of the highlighting phase, our final brush strokes may remain slightly visible on the model. These perpendicular strokes will sell the idea that the light is interacting with the surface of the skin rather than it looking like the little line of paint that it actually is. I'm taking a little more time with the skin on this miniature because I want it to be the focal point of the piece. Also, this is my first time painting a finely sculpted resin miniature and I want to savor it. The total amount of time spent painting the skin on Elkthorn came in at right around an hour and 40 minutes. Now this is a significant amount of time for me, considering I usually try to spend just 3 to 5 hours painting a single miniature like this. Now we move on to our typical final highlight color. I prefer ice yellow for this, but almost any bright off-white color will work here. I have this ice yellow well thinned with water so that I don't overpower the previous layers with the stark contrast of this near white paint. It's a lot safer to apply the paint in thin, translucent layers and build to a full opacity on only the smallest and brightest of areas. I'm primarily focusing these highlights on the upper left side of the model, like the left forearm and Elkthorn's facial features. As we wrap up the fleshy component of Elkthorn here, we're basically just scratching the surface of what is possible when painting skin tones. For a more in-depth look at painting skin tones, check out this video here. Thank you so much for watching. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to join our growing community of painters.